Hello. I'm live. I'm in. How's it going, everybody? I wanted to do this today because we've been home for all of us have been home for a couple of months, and we've been spending more and more time stuck indoors, and and I've been touring for kind of touring on and off for about the last 20 years, and sometimes getting as much as a month at home, but rarely getting much more time at home. And generally speaking, when I get home, I get very excited about the idea of getting out into the garden and planting potatoes and, getting the hands dirty and getting the hands into the earth, because there's something about traveling so much, you become really ungrounded. And I've certainly been grounded in other ways, but certainly ungrounded for many years. And during this time at home, and it's only been a couple of months, it's kind of hard to believe. It feels like we've been home for a long time. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It feels like we've been home for a long time. But actually, we've only been here for a couple of months. But during that time, we've been gardening more, and thank God we have a garden, and I feel really, really lucky. And one of the questions that keeps on coming up today when I asked people to talk about the questions about for this session or for this interview, a lot of you are speaking about what can you do from the perspective of somebody who lives in an apartment, or you only have a window box, so you've got access to very little space or very little land. We've been home for all this time. We've been sort of taking time out. I've been finding myself connecting more with the ground, kind of spending more time just sitting in the garden, and actually just kind of enjoying the evenings and the drawn out evenings and the sun going down, and kind of feeling, I guess, starting to tune into a deeper sort of rhythm in the garden, noticing the season change. We were here at the end of winter. I finished touring in November, so I've been home since November with the odd little outing, and feeling a kind of a stronger connection with the ground, with the earth, with the garden, with this environment that we live in, this beautiful environment that we're lucky enough to live in. And I was at home a few weeks ago and with my friend Mark Geary, who's my neighbour, and he said, you should go on Instagram and do this. You should do a little gig. And I remember thinking, God, I can't relate to the idea of doing a gig online. It just didn't feel right. Something about it just didn't feel natural. And then I took his advice and I did it. And I was really blown away by the sense of connection that I felt with people from a distance, and made particularly poignant by the fact that where everybody is stuck at home at this time, and I guess there's a sort of a larger sense of isolation and dislocation among us all. And so singing a few songs on Instagram was had an amazing sense of being in control of my time here, and being able to sort of self-publish, if you like. This idea of, I think I'm kind of late to it, but this idea that we all, now that anybody who has a phone is a self-publisher, is a fascinating idea. So I thought about, I've been kind of reaching out towards the wisdom of others with regard to the garden. I bought the John Seymour book on self-sufficiency, a wonderful book. And I became a real fan of his. And then there was Charles, what's his name now? Charles, Joe, if you're there. And Myra and I have become big fans of his. He's the guy that does the no-dig gardens. And Joe Doyle, of course, from my band, Joe, our bass player, is an incredible inspiration to me, because he gardens an awful lot, and he's very, very connected with the earth and very connected with his own plot of land and self-sufficiency. And so, reaching out to the wisdom of others, I thought, I've been speaking to Mary Reynolds on and off, and asking Mary for guidance here and there. And we were on the phone to each other yesterday, and we were talking about the forest, and we were talking about, where should I plant this rowan tree, or where should I put this I have this oak sapling, but I don't think it's getting enough light. Where do you think I should put it? And so we started talking, and it was such a wonderful conversation. I just said, hey, Mary, would you be open to talk? Because, you know, I've spoken about We Are the Ark on stage. Maybe some of you were at a gig where I spoke about We Are the Ark, which is this idea, very simple idea, that if you have a piece of land, whether it's a field, whether it's a piece of your garden, or whether it's just a window box in your apartment, is there something can we use that small piece of natural land to somehow help the other inhabitants of this earth, the birds, the pollinators, the foxes, the hedgehogs? Is there any way that we can help and give back a little bit of the land? Because we've just taken so much, and so I asked Mary, would she be interested in coming on and talking a little bit, just talking. Thank you, Evie. I like this sweater, although it's full of holes, but it's my gardening one. So I've asked Mary to join me. Now I don't know. Now, is she here? Let me see. Mary. Questions from people will be shown here. Okay, that's not there. Mary, if you're tuned in, this will be a good time to join me. I'm not sure. Da-dum-dum. Okay, brilliant. Here we are. Add. Okay, Mary's coming through now, I think. So we can kind of just have a chat about all of this stuff. Look, you're getting Instagram savvy. It's true. It's true. Thanks, everybody. This is wonderful. The last time I looked, we had 666 followers, 666 people viewing us, which is fascinating. So, Mary, I'm waiting for you there. Let's see. Sometimes this can be a little bit tricky. So, you know, while I'm waiting for... Oh, is that Binzer? How are you, Binzer? I know. Do you know what? I've just been out in the garden digging. I was out in the garden just before coming on. I decided the best thing to do would be to go out and do a little planting, as we got some saplings that we were putting in, and I decided the best way to prepare myself for this conversation tonight would be to literally go out and do it. Now, let me see. I'm going to see if Mary's there again. Okay, boom. So, Mary, I'm adding you now. Let's see if you come through. Let's build an ark, unable to join. That kind of leaves me here on my own. So I guess I'll just ask questions to the sky. Mary, I'm going to give you a few more minutes. If it's possible, you can come on board. And if not, the conversation will go a different way, or maybe I'll sing a song or two. Because, you know, honestly, I'm coming at this from a layman's perspective. Now, I see another person looking to join. Let me see. We Are the Ark. Add. Let's see if this works. Waiting for Let's Build an Ark. So I may ask Myra to help me with this in a minute if she has time. And there might be too many people requesting. Thank you, Sinead. That's possible. Let me see. Hello, people from Russia. How are you getting on? A song, Glenn. Okay, we'll do something. Let us be patient. Let us be patient. Nice one. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your patience. What do I am on with Mary. Hang on, what's this? I am on with Mary. Oh, okay. Hang on, let me see. Kate, hang on a second. I'm going to try to invite Mary. Hang on. There she is. Mary, are you coming through? Let's see if she comes through with Wild Mary.
Okay.
Mary, there you are.
I couldn't get the Let's Build an Ark one to join for some reason, so I swapped over anyway.
Great, that's the spirit. We're busking, so we have to go at the moment. It's really great to see you, Mary, and thanks so much for doing this.
No problem. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. We've sort of had a bit of a friendship with the audience out there, with people, friends from all over the world. You know, one of the wonderful things about the Frames and touring with my own projects, the swell season, is that we've kind of developed over the years a direct friendship with a lot of our audience. And so something like this feels actually very natural because, you know, a lot of the names that are popping up now, I actually know these people, and so I can, you know, I kind of get the little inside jokes, and I get so it's a lovely thing to connect with people, in this way. So Mary, thanks for your time.
Of course, it's great to be here. Yeah.
It's really wonderful. I kind of wanted to, I wanted to reach out to you because, like, as I was saying, you probably heard me in my intro talking about having more time at home, sort of connecting with the land, spending a bit more time around the garden. And
I remember planting spuds with you there a long time ago.
Oh yeah. And you know, the problem with every time I planted spuds back then, I never had a chance to go back.
I know.
And actually weed or take care of them. So whatever we got out of the ground at the end of that, you know, when it was September, if we even got back for that time in September, what we were pulling out of the ground was just loads of weeds and a few spuds, you know. So it's really wonderful to be able to get to spend time and watch the plants grow. I mean, we planted the spuds, well, Myra planted them, in fairness, the first batch of spuds in, what was it, early March? Yeah. In early March this year, we planted a bunch, and we went out the other morning, and I noticed Myra came back in and said, wow, there's something up, because all of the leaves were black.
Oh.
And I took a photograph and I sent it to Joe Doyle, and I said, do we have blight? Because I thought maybe, you know, my first thing whenever I think about spuds being Irish is the spuds are dead. It must be the famine again. You know, it must be blight. And Joe said, no, don't worry. That's just frost. That's frost burn. They'll be back. But I wanted to just ask you, Mary, if you know, we are the ark. Let's build an ark. You know, the language of this idea of a, you know, I kind of wanted to talk about the language of, well, first of all, you know, I wanted you to sort of talk about what it is that you do, just because a lot of people would be coming to this without knowing who you are or what it is that you're doing. And I just wanted to talk about, well, I just wanted you to ask, but just basically a very simple question. What is Let's Build an Ark, or what is We Are the Ark?
Okay, well, We Are the Ark came about as kind of like a culmination of all my years of slowly letting go of who I became as a garden designer. I kind of ended up, I went to college only because I fancied a guy in landscape design. It wasn't a great calling. And then I went on to win the Chelsea Flower Show, which was a big deal. I was the youngest woman to ever do that at the time. And that was way back in 2002. And then I kind of slowly kind of worked my way back to kind of knowing that even though I was designing wild gardens, I was not really allowing the land to become what I wanted to. So I wrote a book about that. Then that wasn't enough. And I knew there was still something not right. So one morning my kids were at school, and I was sitting upstairs at my desk looking down over my lawn. And it was winter. It was not this winter just gone, the winter before. And a fox ran past, and then soon chasing the fox, which became kind of unusual in itself. And I looked up a little while later, and there was like a hedgehog or a family of hedgehogs, you know, coming along the side of the ditch, and they were all running away from something. So I thought, this is really strange. They're nocturnal creatures. They should be hibernating. So I went out to see what was going on, and I walked to the end of my lane, and there's been this one. I live on.
Mary, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. There's a couple of people commenting on feedback. So could you turn down your speaker a touch on your phone? I think it's because just a couple of people are making the
Is that better?
Comments. Just we ask the folks, is that better? Because it sounds fine to me.
But better now.
There's an echo in your voice.
There's an echo. What would that be from?
It's the echo of the ancients.
Put your sound a bit lower.
I'm gonna put my sound a bit lower too.
Maybe I should make a. Maybe it's because it's sitting in a plastic container.
Is that right?
Maybe. Hang on. If I try this, it might help.
That might do it.
Would that be better? Better?
Let's see. Sounds good. Does that
Yeah.
someone said sounds good? Bad audio, Mary. Let's ask the audience. Yes, better, much better.
Headphones.
Okay, great.
I can use headphones.
Okay, now a crackle.
Somebody...
It's a little better now. We're
I'm gonna
generally
use
speaking, the messages are good. It's already better. Headphones.
Yeah,
Headphones.
you know what? I dropped my phone a few times. How's that? That's probably better.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that sounds good to me now too.
Okay, Hiba is saying better. Thanks, Hiba.
Okay, right.
Okay, wonderful. So now, would you start that story again? Because that's I've heard you tell this story before, and I really would love to hear it. So just go back to the bit where you're doing your dishes.
Okay. So I was looking down over the garden, and a fox ran past, and it was winter, not this winter, just gone, the one before. And just after the fox, a couple of wild hares, and normally stay around, so I thought that was unusual. And then a few minutes later, I looked up and there was a hedgehog or a family. Like, I remember it as a family of hedgehogs, but that doesn't make any sense. But they were all coming along the edge of the ditch, and there was something wrong. They were all running away from something. So I went outside and I followed the direction they were coming from. I live on a country lane, and I walked down the end of my lane across the little road. There had been this amazing wild field, and it was a thicket of hawthorn and bramble and gorse, all wild plants, and it was impenetrable. And I had never really taken any notice of it, but somebody had got planning permission, and that day they'd gone in with a digger and they'd completely cleared out the field without any thought for any of those creatures that lived there to make a lawn, a garden.
But of course, if people were clearing, people would never even think about clearing out. They would just be like, let's get rid of all these brambles and bushes, and I guess people wouldn't even spare a thought for that.
No, because I had done the same thing myself so many times.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I realized that my career as such was over. And I just had this instant kind of image of this ark, that we are leaving all these wild creatures nowhere left to go. Humans have pretty much wiped out 83% of all the wild creatures on the planet, and they can't go into agricultural land because it's poisoned, and all the habitats are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and the hedgerows are becoming neat and clipped, and gardens are full of plants that are not native, that have been soaked in chemicals, and they're tidy. So there's nowhere for creatures to go. We have left them nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. So I went back inside and I started writing a new book called We Are the Ark, which is acts of restorative kindness to the earth. And then I realized that's going to take way too long. So I rang Joe and Claire and Jen, and Claire and Joe and Jen helped me put together a website called We Are the Ark. Yeah. And it started a movement which has taken off all over the world. And people just put up signs, ask in their garden, in half their garden, as much as they can spare, if they're not growing food, to give their land back to nature so that she can take care of all her creatures, not just us. Because actually we're completely dependent and hopelessly dependent upon those creatures, upon their health, upon their presence, upon their abundance, and we're not sharing. Yeah. So gardens, as far as I'm concerned, Glen, are old world. And so I think if you have any land, if you're lucky enough to have any land at all, you should number one, try and grow your own food without chemicals, and give the rest back to nature. And it's that simple. It's a very simple idea. And I ask people to put up signs in their gardens saying this is an ark, and they write the wearetheark.org underneath, so that when people pass by, instead of seeing a mess, they don't feel ashamed, because that can be the main problem for people. They're not ashamed anymore. They're now proud that they're doing something positive, and their neighbors don't give them a hard time,
Yeah, because you'd imagine walking by a garden, and it's just all brambles and thickets, and people be like, oh my God, what kind of people are they, So you can imagine how people would be terrified of that. I mean, I remember when we moved out here first, maybe 15 years ago. I'm from a built up area, like tower blocks, and I grew up I grew up very dislocated from nature. I grew up in concrete, 15-story tower blocks, I grew up, and for me, all wood was wood for the bonfire. That's all. My only relationship with anything made of wood
Yeah.
was that, you know, it was to go on the Halloween bonfire, and Halloween was our, you know. So actually, we were quite pagan as kids. Halloween was the best holiday of the year. That
Yeah.
was the one that we actually put the most effort into. We collected wood, we stored wood in little areas so that on Halloween day we put all the wood on the bonfire and we'd set fire to it, and we'd have the biggest fire. You know, it was all about competition, and you know. But I remember, you know, much to my shame, I remember kicking down trees. Like there was a you know, Ballymun was essentially just like green lawn and tall buildings. And there was no trees. There was no trees around it. There was nothing. And there was a kind of in the mid-70s, there was a drive to put trees around the buildings to create a kind of an atmosphere, or you know, to create a more natural feeling. But as kids, we saw those trees, and there they were. They were like saplings. They were like 6 feet tall saplings with a piece of corrugated protective iron around them and a stake in the ground next to them to keep them upright. And we would just run at them and kick them until eventually they fell. And we would just do it systematically to each one of them. Now, I'm absolutely ashamed as an adult to speak of that time. Yeah, I know. Ronan, go on. Oh, Jesus. But it's true that we had no connection to what these things were. We had no connection to nature, and so as I've grown up, those things come back to you in moments, in flickers of memory, where you realize, oh my God, not only was I completely tree blind, I was just like, I just wasn't connected with nature in any way. And all of these trees, all they were for, as far as I was concerned, were for the bonfire. The reason we were kicking them down was so that we could collect them along with the rest of the wood and put them on the fire, and that we'd have the biggest bonfire. You know.
But I bet you do have a memory, because everyone does, of some point in your childhood finding some connection with something in nature and being a very powerful connection.
I do, Mary. I have an incredible memory in primary school of being brought on a nature walk. It was the only time it ever happened, where the teachers took us out of school and they brought us, I think, to Santry Woods. And Santry Woods is another big part of my childhood that I'll get back to later on. Santry Woods was this woodland right near us. And obviously it was privately owned, and we were allowed to go for nature walks, and that was it. It wasn't public land. And we went for a walk in the woods, and I remember the teacher explaining to us what leaf this was, and what, you know, like the oak cones, and like bringing back, you know, basically just bringing back all of these little pieces of nature back to the classroom. And there was something so wonderful about having these leaves and acorns and having them, and then drawing them in the classroom and saying, this is an oak acorn, you know, and then learning a little bit about what an oak tree was, and oak trees covered Ireland, and, you know, learning a little bit about the history. And I remember it being by far the most exciting connection with nature. And I remember actually what I did when I got home, and it's something that always stuck with me, was I was so fascinated by the idea that you could bring the leaves into the classroom. You could bring the outside into the inside. That was a big thing for me, like almost like an abstract idea that you could bring the outside into the inside. And my brother had a tape recorder, and I remember taking the tape recorder.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a blank tape, or maybe I taped over something, I can't remember. But I took the tape recorder outside and I put it on top of our shed. We had a little garden shed. And I put it on top. This is when we moved into the houses. We lived in the flats for years, and then we moved into the houses when I was about 10. And I put the tape recorder on top of the shed, and I put loads of little bits of bread around the tape recorder. And I remember going up to my bedroom and looking through the curtains down at the roof of the shed, and the birds were, and I pressed record on the tape recorder.
Wow.
And all the birds had landed around the tape recorder, and you're all eating. You're all feeding on the bread and singing, and, you know. And I remember when the bread was all gone, going down to the shed, climbing up on top of it, taking the tape recorder, bringing it up to my bedroom, getting inside the wardrobe, closing the doors in the dark, pressing rewind and play.
Wow.
And was blown away at this idea that I could bring the outside
So cool.
inside. Yeah, so it was.
What did you hear? Did you actually get sound out of it? Like,
Oh yeah, amazing! It was
yeah.
like listening to birds speaking within a foot of your ear,
Oh,
but
wow.
getting to hear it inside.
Conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Getting to hear kind of private conversations inside your wardrobe. And don't
That's
ask
so
me why I
cool.
felt the need to go inside the wardrobe, but I did.
But it's amazing. Everybody has those memories, and like, look at you now. You like, I know you've been an amazing voice for nature over the years, and you know, it was that one connection that sparked that, you know. And everybody has them, you know. I had one particular one when I was young. Everybody does, you know, and
What's
you
yours,
just,
Mary?
well, mine is well, I want okay, I can tell you.
There's a film about it, so you might as well tell us.
Okay, thanks, Glenn.
Yeah.
No,
No, but it's
um,
beautiful, man. This is,
I know.
it's actually amazing.
I'm going red now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the film, yeah, it didn't really quite capture it, but it was very simple. I grew up on a farm in Wexford, and there was 6 of us, and I was the youngest, and it was a lot of freedom. You know, we had a very different upbringing, and mum and dad were working full time as well as being farmers. So when I was young, I used to wander off and just spend all my time wandering around outside on my own, you know. Um, and I remember one time walking into a field at the top of the farm. I was there the other day, and I walked in through this gap, which was about 4 meters wide, through a very, very thick hedge, a very small field.
Yeah.
And when I walked through the field, I was about 5 or 6, I think. And when I just felt like there was something behind me, and I turned around, and the ditch had completely closed behind me. This is the memory I have, and it might sound
It's
completely
beautiful.
insane.
No, I love it. I
But
love it.
anyway, um, I was really frightened, because obviously that's scary for a kid, you know, and I walked around and I was crying, but I was away from everybody, so nobody could hear me, and I couldn't find my way out. And then eventually I got distracted by the sunshine, and, you know, the butterflies and the meadow, and I sat in the middle of the meadow, and I just chilled and just looked at all the creatures, you know. And then I noticed that I was being watched, and it's not something weird. All I noticed was that the plants were watching me, all the plants in the ditches, and there was a feeling of, I just recognized, because I didn't have any of those preconceived ideas as a kid, I just recognized that these plants were individuals and had, you know, spirit, the
Yeah.
same way people do, and that they were wanting me to notice them, which is, that's all I could describe it as. And that's all that happened that day. I was stuck there all day. The same thing had happened to my great grandfather in that field. My dad told me years later, when I was
Oh
18.
wow.
It's kind of known locally as Fairy Field. You know, you don't go into it
Yeah.
without telling someone.
Yeah.
Everybody has.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, those things, they exist in Ireland, you know, in many places. But anyway, it was only years later, when I was writing my book, that I tried to think about that moment for me, and what it was. I was trying to work out what actually happened then, and why it was so important for me.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was to do with, it's kind of, the earth is like a big heart, you know, and it's like this beautiful big heart, that when we started looking at the earth in terms of ownership instead of in terms of guardianship, the earth got shattered into pieces. And some of us are lucky enough to have a little piece of that heart that we look after.
Yeah.
And there's boundaries on that heart. And everything within that little piece of earth that we look after is part of our family, and we're part of that family. And there's something magical about that relationship we have with our land, if we are lucky enough to have any. That's basically it. And that's when I realized that we need to become guardians, not gardeners. We need to be of service to nature, not
Right.
use it. We need to restore the heart as
Yeah.
much as we can. We've got to heal this earth as quickly as possible. And most of us are really tired of waiting for leadership to step up. And, you know, I've heard this term, that we're the leaders we've been waiting for. And that's such a true
Wow,
statement.
yeah.
And so it's up to us. And so when I was building this concept with Claire and Jen and Joe and Ruth, of course, who did all the beautiful illustrations, it was the whole concept was I didn't want to own it. This isn't, you know, that's why I called it We Are the Ark.
Yeah.
Because I want everyone who has any land or who has access to any land or who has any influence over public land or farming land to take ownership of it and to become a guardian and to give it back to nature and to be powerful and to empower themselves to do something really positive, because it only takes 3% of a population to shift consciousness before everybody shifts.
Wow.
So it's not a huge thing to shift a consciousness. So I'm absolutely convinced that this movement has the potential to shift the environmental movement in a really positive way, because it empowers each individual rather than waiting for someone else to do it.
Yeah. Mary, thank you for that. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about on this exact subject about you know, we've been seeing in the news here in Ireland, we've been seeing, you know, news reports of foxes on Camden Street, foxes on Grafton Street. There was footage the other night of a fox running up Grafton Street. There's nobody out in the streets. And for those of you guys in America and other countries, we're in lockdown. So there's a kind of a, you know, even though there's a bit of movement, and there's a lot of movement in the city, there's generally speaking, there's a lot less. And out here in Kildare, I don't know if there's an answer for this at all, but we've got seagulls in Kildare for the first time. I don't quite know what's going on. We never see seagulls in Kildare because we're about, just to give everybody a perspective, Kildare is about an hour inland from the sea. Now, seagulls hang out at the sea, hence the name. And so the idea that the birds are coming inland, I'm wondering if it's got to do with, is it the fact that there's no weekend chips getting thrown all over the city centre, and that because the birds aren't getting a lot of fish anymore. They've become dependent on the trawlers. The fish stocks are being depleted. I don't know if this is a bigger conversation. Maybe it is.
No, it's all part of it. Yeah.
But it feels like the seagulls are now having to go further afield to find food, and instead of going further out to sea, they're coming further inland. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the health of the sea is one of those big issues. You know, I mean, the main problem, we need to give the seas back to nature as well, as much as we can. You know, one of the main problems is bottom trawling. You know, I don't know if you've come across that, where they drag the bottoms of the ocean.
Yeah.
They destroy the ecosystems. It's the most damaging thing they can do.
Yeah.
And so when you destroy an ecosystem or you overfish the seas, then of course it's going to collapse, and it's collapsed very, very quickly. So, but the wonderful thing about it is how quickly nature recovers if we just support her to recover. And so when you go back to the beginning of your statement about, you know, you see foxes now in towns, and that's not necessarily a good thing because they're probably hungry, you know, but the fact that they're very brave because they're hungry, that are wandering around. But I mean, the reality is when people come back out of lockdown, all those creatures will have to go back to finding the little space they had already. So I do think that there has to be a lot of pressure put on our politicians to stop listening to lobby groups, to stop listening to the multinationals, to start protecting our people. Because remember, I sent you that article earlier about you know, looking after the land. It's really important that the leader of our land takes care of the land, you know, because otherwise it becomes the wasteland, and that's what we have now. And so, I mean, the Amazon is kind of, you know, under pressure. The Congo is under pressure. Everything is hitting a tipping point, but it's definitely a time of change. And I do think we have the potential for massive positive change. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, you know, I just think that, well, first of all, I think when we speak about Ireland and we talk about the Irish nature in Ireland, forestry, we talk about the wildlife, and because we're speaking about our own, we become a microcosm for everything else. So, I wouldn't be qualified to talk about the Amazon other than to say that my heart leaps out of my chest when I hear it mentioned. But other than that, I don't know the ins and outs. So in a way, I sort of feel like if I can truly speak about, we were talking about this the other night in another conversation about songwriting. If I can look at my garden, just my little garden out here, it's not my garden, the garden, if you like, even looking at the health of the garden and the health of the plants, that in some way is a microcosm for the whole thing.
It totally is. Yeah.
That the more we focus just on the very details of our own tiny patch that we're guardians of, not gardeners of, but guardians of, that actually speaks to the whole of the world. That the more we get specific, the more universal the message. But I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to ask you about because one of the things that really inspired me about Let's Build an Ark, or We Are the Ark, was this idea that you're building a patchwork. Because one of the things that I really loved about what you were saying was that, if for instance if I'm a bee and I'm living next to a massive farm, that my natural my natural beat is from this hedge to this hedge and from that one to that one. That when we're living on huge farms, then we have to travel further and further to get to wildflowers or get to to pollinate and so one of the things I love about your message is that through allowing your garden go wild, what you're doing is you're creating a patchwork, and this was the thing that I really loved about your message, a patchwork of wildlife, so that the animals don't need to travel so far between patchworks. Because for instance, we're very fortunate. We live in this incredible, I'm just going to show people outside our window. We live in this incredible place where we have, there's Matthew, where we have, where we have, we live in a forest. Our address is Pickering Forest. Now, it's a very small patch of forest. But when you go outside, there's an incredible society of life that we're really, really aware of, and we get glimpses of, and every so often it runs through the garden, or we catch a glimpse, and it's a very, very powerful feeling. But I just love your idea of the patchwork, and that if we keep on building on the patchwork, then nature has less and less of a journey to make. And I just, love you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's the main point. Is it like this vision I had of a patchwork quilt of healed bits of earth that wraps its way around the globe, and eventually, obviously, see, all these little patches are islands, and we need to connect the islands up. And so simple things like, making holes in your boundary walls. If you live in a housing estate, remove the walls and put in a living boundary, like a hedge, which will provide more sanctuary. The idea is, look, what can one person do, right? What can one person do? Because how much policy can you or me influence? We've been banging our heads against the wall for so long. So this is a totally different way of coming at it. And by repairing each little patch of this earth and bringing it back to true health, to as full a natural ecosystem as you can, that's going to be hugely positive. And I think somebody asked a question earlier about, we can't just let it go, and that's so true, because in a fully working ecosystem, there will be, wolves and, badgers and deer, and they all have something to do. And so because they won't be in our systems, we have to become the deer, or become the wolf, or become the wild boar, or whatever it is that you have in your ecosystem. So we need to kind of create as much different kind of ecosystem situations as possible to support as many creatures as we can. So it's not about letting it go.
I see a message there from Geo Worth. Let's build bee highways. Now, you were talking about something like this, Mary.
Well,
Let's.
I like. Do you mean along the roads?
Well, just somebody mentioned there, let's build bee highways. I like that idea. I just thought maybe you could have something
Yeah,
on
I
that.
like I like the idea of I think I like the idea of creating networks across every country that connect up large areas of woodland. Like we have to move away from monocultures of woodland. Like
Yeah,
the government are going to have to come on board and change the way we create woodlands, because there's no
yeah,
diversity lives in those woodlands.
yeah,
And we do need to create corridors for
yeah,
wildlife to get from one place to the other once there are real places to go, you know, that
yeah,
aren't
yeah.
poisoned and that will support them. But I'm a little bit concerned, and this is from, you know, this is instinctual more than anything, and that I'm not convinced that along the edges of roads is the best place to throw the bees or the pollinators, because
Sure.
they get killed by cars a lot, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
what about rivers? What about throwing bands
that would be
of
good. Yeah, that would be
because
fantastic.
because you know it seems that you know I've heard, like, I remember watching actually a podcast that you sent me, Mary, by Dr. Zach Bush, who spoke about, you know, I noticed that we don't have that much time left, so I'll try to be quick. Dr. Zach Bush is a doctor of well, God, what is he a doctor of? You probably
He's
know better than I
he's
do.
a I think he's a GP actually, a
He's a
general
GP.
practitioner. Oh no, he's not.
Yeah,
He's a researcher into cancer and stuff like that. I think I can't
he was
really
into
remember.
one particular cancer gene, but
Mm.
he basically made a very interesting point, and I'll try to follow my train of thought here. He said Russia had its Chernobyl, which was a very devastating and very sad part of its history. But he said America also had its Chernobyl. Now, forgive me if I sound like I'm going off on one now, but I'm just trying to
It's okay.
quote Zach Bush. He said, in the 70s, he said basically they noticed that the rise in cancer patients, obesity, diabetes, and there were
Autism,
cardiovascular. There was the
autism.
autism. There was a huge rise in the 70s of all of these diseases, and that they thought they may have linked it to antibiotics, the use of antibiotics, because there was a huge rise in antibiotics with doctors in the 70s. Now I'm only paraphrasing now, so please, you know, don't take me word for word. Check out Dr. Zach Bush, everybody. Please write that down, because he does some incredible podcasts. Very interesting man. But he talked about America having its Chernobyl. And he said, if you look at a map of America and you look at the cancer hotspots in America, he said we could see that there was a particular area that was worse hit than the rest of the country, but they were using antibiotics all over the country. So he was thinking, it's not that. So what is it? And they figured out. They eventually hit upon this idea that the Mississippi, the Mississippi and all of its tributaries were dying, and so the river was dead, or the river was poisoning people. And what was poisoning the river, they discovered, was the farming all around the Mississippi, where people were using Roundup, glyphosate being the particular ingredient in Roundup that ended up causing most of the problems. They basically discovered that are you there? Just like somebody tried to call me.
Yeah, I'm here.
That,
Yeah.
that if you're not anyway, so I'm going off on one. I don't want to get too into it, but basically that when you don't have trees on the land becomes unstable. When the rain falls on the land, it washes the topsoil away. The topsoil goes into the rivers. The topsoil is full of pesticides. The pesticides end up poisoning the river, ends up killing the mosses and the lichens and the fish, essentially, and then eventually ends up giving people cancer. So it's just a very, very interesting argument against Roundup and against. But anyway, that's down to Dr. Zach Bush. I'd like to. What I'd probably do, Mary, might be a good idea that we put a few links up to stuff that we have looked up and researched ourselves, maybe after this, just so people can go and have a look for themselves. But before we go, I wanted to talk about forests and you know, because we've been talking very much about our own gardens and our own lives within, and you know, our own activism within trying to inspire people to create arcs. But on a governmental level, the guardians of our forests, who are they? In Ireland, who are the guardians of our forests in Ireland? And, you know, Ireland once was pretty much completely covered in woodlands, native woodlands, broadleaf, oak, basically many different species, of native woodland, which was, a home for, most birds, 50% of all mating birds, insects, all of the things that we need are forest dwellers.
Mm.
And the problem is that we have 0.002% of native forest left in Ireland. Now, we can go into what happened to all of the forests and why the forests were allowed to be taken down. A lot of it went into English ships. A lot of it went into Viking ships, let's face it. And a lot of the wood was taken and used by different forces that came in and took over. But this is not about blaming anyone. This is really about where are we now. And surely, and something that it's a Grace who was on Instagram, she posted a lovely thing that just said no forest, no future. And so if very simply, if the future of biodiversity lies in native woodlands, why are the guardians of our forestry only planting monoculture Sika spruce, which doesn't allow any other life to grow below it? It's not part of a society. It's something. A tree, a field full of trees is not a forest. I think that could be an interesting kind of chorus line, if you like, if this was a song. Being a songwriter, that would be my area. A field of trees is not a forest. And in the case of Sika spruce, a field of Christmas trees is not a forest. And yet that takes up 7% of our land is inhabited by Sika spruce. And surely somebody could put together an argument, an economic argument. Unfortunately, the whole economic system is designed to impact ecosystems, failing oil demand. I absolutely agree with you. And this is very interesting. Surely it's in the interests now of our governments to replant native forests. And if there were native forests by the rivers, root systems filter the water, which would keep the water clean and bring the fish back and because then all this, the rain that's rolling off the fields and all the glyphosate wouldn't be getting into the rivers. We would have a very different system. And it's an interesting conversation. I'm aware that we only have 10 minutes left, but it's an interesting donor economics. I love it. It's an interesting conversation to be had. One that I would love to be a small voice in, which we're doing right now, by talking. And again, it all comes from just spending time at home and spending, and it needs a little bit of long-term thinking. Somebody just wrote there, quick money. It's a very good point, quick money. Because what is Sika spruce used for, Mary? Do you know?
Yeah, well, actually, Sika spruce, see, they don't think in terms of biodiversity. They're thinking in terms of money, right? And okay. Farmers are really, and I grew up on a farm, so I totally get this. They have been disempowered so much.
Yeah.
They're not supported to do anything other than what they're told. And they're just trying to pay the rent, to pay their mortgages. They cannot think differently unless they're very brave or they're supported to. So the problem with spruce is that, and I went to a lecture recently. I was given a talk at UCD Sustainability Conference, and the person who was talking before me talked about a beautiful kind of conversation about Ireland's biodiversity. And then she went on to say, a tree is a tree is a tree. What's the problem with spruce? She doesn't understand it, And I stood up in absolute rage going, what was all that beautiful biodiversity about? Because none of that will survive in spruce. There was it does trap carbon, which is what her argument was.
Yeah.
But that's it. But actually, there's a much simpler solution to this, Glen. Okay, yes, they have to change those policies because they are so detrimental. And nature has already collapsed in Ireland. And that's really important. It's not collapsing. It's
Yeah.
already collapsed. So what we're trying to do is claw it back from the edge. But if you take all of the uplands that are supporting sheep at the moment, and you take the sheep off, you don't need to plant any trees generally. Everything is in the soil. There's 5,000 weed seeds within every square foot of soil. All those native tree seeds are there. If they're not there, then we need to plant islands within those vast ranges of burnt gorse, of just dead, sheep-wrecked landscapes. And if we allow those landscapes to rewild, if you pay the farmers, support the farmers to do that, instead of paying them to keep a few sheep on the land that they can't make any money from anyway, then you're going to have these vast nature reserves that will clean the water at source, that will stop flooding further downstream because they're holding the water. It's so obvious. It's such a simple solution, and yet there doesn't seem to be... I don't know, the policies are just, maybe they just don't care, maybe they just don't have any vision, maybe they're, I don't know, I don't know what's wrong with them, because rewilding is actually the solution, because you don't need to plant anything, all the native plants are there. You might, sometimes if they're islandized, you might need to plant islands of native plant trees to restore the diversity. But mostly it will all come back if you just leave it be.
That was a question I wanted to ask you, Mary, but certainly to come back to We Are the Ark. And if you just walk away from your garden and let it go, will it go back? Will essentially all land turn back to forest if you leave it alone?
It wants to, unless it's the top of a mountain or savanna or a floodplain or something, but mostly will. But because we have done so much damage, a lot of the time now we have to step in and support it. So say if you have a lawn outside your window which you've sown, for example, you would have to strip that off and allow the native weed seeds to come out, because we don't. I'm asking people to stop planting things, to trust nature, to grow what is required within the local food web, because everything that is native has evolved within the local food web. Anything that we're told to bring in that feeds the bees or the butterflies, mostly they've been treated with so many chemicals that they're killing everything around them. They look good, they taste a bit like, kind of fast food and everything, but they are not good food for wildlife. They are not.
You're not a big supporter of the bee balm, for instance.
No, I'm not. I unless it's locally insects are they're actually locally adapted to a local food web within a 10 to 20 mile radius. So if you take seeds from too far away, they can often not be suitable for the local invertebrates. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when we make meadows, we call them ark meadows, and we ask people to collect them themselves from the local weed seeds, and that's an ark meadow. So it's not about being pretty, which is what everybody is focused upon, and making their gardens pretty. We're kind of going, feck that, make them hopping with life, like bring them back to life. Just stop looking at land as something pretty. It's not about that anymore. It's about being of service to nature.
I know I'm aware we've got 5 minutes left. I want to just ask you one thing. And this thing is something that's always been on my mind ever since I was a kid. Why are forests always depicted as dark, scary places where bad things happen? Why are they always referred to as arcane and pagan and evil things happen in the forest? Why is the forest so demonized, in your opinion?
Well, I guess that... Well, I don't know why we hate trees, because we're so dependent upon them. But if I could twist that a little bit, when you walk into a woodland and you feel like somebody's watching you, or you don't feel safe. Do you know that feeling?
Yeah.
You feel like you're in the Hansel and Gretel woods, and you're on your own, and it might be dark, and you don't feel safe. And then you'll find another woods that you walk into and you feel completely happy. You feel really safe, even though it's dark. And it's about how that land was treated. So land is a body that, like any body, holds trauma. And if that land has been loved and cared for by its human guardians, for example, or hasn't had human guardians, so the land hasn't learned to hate and fear us, then it has a different energy. So most of the time, because we have manipulated the land so often and so long now, that woods, they feel scary. But you see, the other thing is that you're sensing the presence of beings, and those beings are the trees and the creatures. But we don't allow that consciousness to slip in. So we presume that there must be somebody scary there trying to kill us, or a ghost. But it's actually just the trees.
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to sort of, that's a really, really good perspective. And I was thinking about it in terms of, like the dark forest and the, this idea that, like, you watch that film, The Witch, the recent film,
No.
But I remember I had a dream when I was a kid. It was a terrible dream. Where I remember, when you have a dream and you just remember all your life. And I was in a dark shed and I was lying on the ground, and I was in Ballymun, because you used to have these sheds underneath the flats. And I woke up and I saw this witch, and she was a classic witch, green, long nose, big hat, stirring a pot, And I was so terrified because the witch turned and looked at me. And I had this moment of absolute terror, and that dream stayed with me my whole life. And I remember recently I was with a friend who said, and I was telling them about the dream, and my friend said, it was an amazing woman. She said, go back to that dream for a second. Let's sit down and go back to that dream. And when the witch looks at, try to go back to that moment. When the witch looks at you, what happens? And I kind of went back, and I know I'm going off on a bit of an esoteric one now, but actually what happened when the witch looked at me, when I went back to the dream, was that she was recognizing me. She was saying hello, rather than in my interpretation my whole life, which is that the witch was like, whereas actually it was some sort of connection with the feminine. And this is the thing I want to talk about the forests, and about the dark forest and this kind of Chthonian, underworld place. Whereas actually, I think the fairy tales were there to keep us out of the forests.
Totally.
Because the forests were private property, and so make them scary and make them this place where people don't go, because we don't want them in here, because forests were originally people's wealth. It was the sign of people, and you can't have people in there it was just a fascinating idea. And I'm sorry to kind of use my dream as a metaphor, but I think it's a, I think in a funny kind of a way, I sort of feel like there's an incredible rise in the feminine in the world right now, and it's a very, very important feeling that we have to go with. And I'm really drawn to this conversation. Now we're about to get cut off, Mary. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance.
It's great.
But,
we got through loads.
We have 2 minutes remaining, but I just wanted to finish on the subject of the feminine and just get your thoughts on it.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. There's an imbalance. The feminine, your dream is actually part of that. The crone. That crone energy, which has been, look, originally the goddess of sovereignty, which is freedom of the land, the freedom of the land to become what it wants to become, was the crone energy. And, we need to give that sovereignty back to the land. That's what this is all about. And that's the balance we need to strike again with the feminine. We need to set it free, give it back,
Yeah, absolutely. Give it back to nature. Listen, thanks, Mary.
Thanks,
I realize we've got 1 minute left, but I just want to thank everybody for showing up. And I've been noticing as we've been speaking, Mary, there's been such incredible book recommendations, documentary recommendations, further reading. And I've been noticing all of the questions coming through, some really hilarious things coming through. But I really want to thank everybody. And if there's a way that we can keep this going by way of maybe the comments, we'll post this. I think I know how to save it now. We'll save it, and if people, maybe we can do this again, Mary. If you feel up to it.
No problem, of course.
I feel like we only got through a tiny amount of what we were here to talk about. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and that was really, really interesting. Very special time.
Thanks, Glenn. Do you know how to post it to like YouTube or something? I don't know
I
how to
think
do that.
I don't, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna figure it out.
There's loads of people keep asking. That's the only reason.
Yeah, let's do
But
it.
yeah. Thanks, Dal.
Let's
It was
do it.
lovely to talk to you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
God
Bye
bless.
bye.
Bye. Bye.